Another year, and Halloween is upon us once more. As traditions would have it, little kiddies will go out asking strangers for candy, only to find out that they have disease-ridden needles in it, puncturing their fat little cheeks. Or perhaps they have a razor blade cutting deep into their gums as they bite into that candy apple. But say you're too old for trick-or-treating, but still want to get into the festivities. So you go to a caution party where no one knows your name and they can't see your face, and you get offered a drink, and shortly after your vision gets blurry and you black out. Next thing you know, you're in the back of a trunk headed for Texas. You can guess what happens next. As for me, well, with the social reject that I am, I don't get to participate in these traditions, so I've had to create my own. Last year, I tortured myself with 5 crappy bosses, and as traditions would have it, I have cooked up 5 more. So once again, I present to you to the Top 5 Crappiest Bosses Volume 2. Let the insanity begin. Mandy is definitely not your average porcelain doll. Believed to be made roughly between 1910 and 1920, this possibly once treasured antique harbors a haunting story. The original owner of Mandy would wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of a crying baby that would echo throughout the house. But once she had enough courage to investigate, as you would imagine, there would be no baby. Just a window that was originally closed but somehow would be open in any room that Mandy was in. With these strange sounds and occurrences taking its toll on the owner, she finally decided to donate Mandy to the Quesnel District Museum in British Columbia, allowing her nightmare to finally end. But the museums had just begun. Once Mandy was put on display, strange occurrences that happened with the original owner also started here as well as other strange things. The museum staff's lunches would disappear from the fridge, only to be found tucked in drawers throughout the building, and many items would also disappear, most never to be found. Oftentimes, cameras would glitch out or batteries would drain unexpectedly when around the doll. Mandy has even been moved once to her own display case, reason being that she would harm the other dolls. Infamous was like a diamond in the rough for me. I would see this game on the shelf all the time when it first came out, and I would read the title, Infamous. Yeah, never said good old Dirtbag was the sharpest. If anything, I'm actually completely fucked. But there was something about this game that told me I had to try it, so I bought it, brought it home, played it for a couple hours, and was loving it. Getting to beat the crap out of and shoot people with lightning, oh, so good! But after the first couple hours, I didn't touch it again for a few months. Don't ask me why, like I said, I'm not the sharpest. Funny enough, I did the same thing for Red Dead Redemption, so yeah, kind of a retard. But once I got back into it, it quickly became one of my favorite new franchises of the 7th generation. But if there was one thing I always felt that was kind of lacking in these games, it was some of the final bosses. This is a series about getting superpowers and fighting others with such powers, so you'd think that the final confrontation would be this huge and epic and awesome and crazy, and you get the fucking picture? And for Infamous 2, it was. It didn't matter which karma side you took, both endings were amazing and so satisfying to play despite how depressing the story ended for each side. Augustine from Second Son, on the other hand, well, there's a lot left to be desired. For me, I think a final boss can make or break a game in terms of how you're going to feel about it overall. They're supposed to be the big finale, usually your final experience of the main game. And if they fall flat on their face, or at the very least don't match up with the other bosses in the game, it'll leave you with that feeling of, that's it? Really? And a feeling like that can really jade someone's opinion about a game. Uncharted 3 is a perfect example of this. So what was the problem with Augustine? Honestly, I think it was the fact that the boss before her was a lot more entertaining. Now, Kessler from the first game suffered from a similar situation, but let's be real, all the bosses in the first game were kind of average, and it was the first game, so I cut it some slack. But for Second Son, it ain't getting off so easily. Maybe Infamous 2 spoiled me a bit, but I was kind of disappointed with Augustine's second fight. The idea of this fight is just like any other fight. Use your power as a blaster while dodging your attacks. The problem is, that's all I felt like I was doing here. Some of the best boss fights in the series felt really engaging in that something bigger was going on than just 2 conduits taking shots at each other. And the fight with Eugene that came before this did that fairly well in my opinion, with having angels and demons coming after you and him booting you out of the system. Shit like that made it really cool. It was not only fun to play through, but also highly entertaining too. You don't really get that here. All Augustine does is try and shoot concrete at you, and when you get into the second half, she turns into this concrete monster form that actually reminded me of the Alden fight from Infamous 1. The resemblance is uncanny. Now, I'll give him credit for trying something different with the gimmick of giving you access to your final power element during this fight, which is cool and all, but kind of a big tease too if you already did everything like I did. Fucking bullshit. In the end though, it's not a bad fight. But when the fight before this one feels more engaging and epic, well, I think you might have screwed up a little. Again, not a horrible fight, I've seen plenty worse, but the unfulfilling feeling you get from this one is why it's on the list. And I couldn't really think of a 5th one, so yeah. Sorry! In 1918, this doll was bought in Sapporo by Akichi Suzuki for his 2-year-old sister Okiku. When Akichi returned home, he presented the doll to his little sister, who fell in love with it immediately. The doll became Okiku's favorite toy and best friend. Okiku played with her doll every day and soon gave it the same name as herself, and the two would become inseparable. Unfortunately, a year later, Okiku passed away at the age of 3 due to a severe fever. The doll was originally meant to be buried with Okiku, but because of an unforeseen circumstance, the doll was never placed with Okiku in her final resting place. Instead, the doll was placed in a family altar to honor their daughter. After some time had passed though, the family had noticed that the doll's hair had gotten longer. They believed that their daughter's soul now inhabited the doll. In 1938, Okiku was donated to the Manji Temple, where many photos have been taken over the years showing that the doll's hair has grown in length, having to regularly trim its hair to make sure it doesn't get too long. It has been said that upon analysis of a cut sample from the hair, it does indeed belong to that of a child, but since the sample was not cut directly from the doll itself, no definitive conclusion can be made. Do I even have to say anything? The footage speaks for itself. I know why this boss fight is horrible, you know why it's horrible. But like the majority of Sonic 06, this is so bad it's, I don't want to say good, but it's fucking hilarious. Honestly, it's like the game becomes sentient in the Silver the Hedgehog fights. When you get locked in like this, the game is basically telling you, sure, I could have mercy and just end your life. But no, I want to make you suffer. Yes, loading screens are a hell of a long time in this, but I'll top that with an endless loop of being hit, keeping a ring each time to make sure you just don't die. Time is being wasted even longer. If this was any other game, I'd probably want to wheel my controller through the TV. But with how hilariously bad Sonic 06 is in general, I can't help but laugh anytime I play this fight and this happens. Hell, sometimes I'll count how many times in a row this happens till I actually die, just to see how high that number gets. That's honestly kind of pathetic. Even before the movie The Conjuring heightened her popularity even more, Annabelle is probably the most famous haunted doll in recent years. Now while the real Annabelle doesn't act or look as evil as she's portrayed, this Raggedy Ann doll still has a very dark past. In 1970, a nursing student named Donna was given a Raggedy Ann doll by her mother. At first, Donna and her roommate thought nothing about the doll was special, but that quickly changed. At first, the Raggedy Ann doll would move in just subtle ways, where one would think it was just a natural occurrence, such as an object slumping over after time has passed. But soon, it would become a lot more mobile, to the point that they would place it on Donna's bed, leave for the day, then to come home only to find it sitting on the couch. Of course, Annabelle didn't become notorious as an evil possessed doll just for moving around in an apartment. One night, Donna returned home to find Annabelle in her bed, with blood on her hands. The blood, or some sort of red liquid, seemed to be coming from the doll itself. This was enough to finally get Donna to agree to bring in a medium. According to the legend, a 7-year-old girl named Annabelle Higgins was found dead in the field that used to exist where the apartment building now stood. Her spirit remained, and when a doll came into the house, the girl latched onto it. She found Donna and her roommate to be trustworthy, and just wanted to stay with them. She wanted to be safe with them. With Donna and her roommates being the sweet, nurturing types, they agreed to allow Annabelle to stay with them, a decision they would surely regret. Highlights include weird dreams of the doll choking Donna's friend, a series of raking claw marks on people who came into contact with Annabelle, and multiple people who came into contact with the doll would suffer car problems, with even a priest who attempted to exorcise the doll surviving a car crash. Whether the legend of Annabelle is true or just a myth, it's probably a safe bet to be cautious of her if you're in its vicinity. I think it's safe to say that a majority of people weren't satisfied with Resident Evil 6. Now, I was probably less harsh on it than most, as despite its numerous flaws, there was still stuff I could honestly find fun about it. Mainly the bonus modes with, hey, that still counts because I say it does, so shut the fuck up. Yeah, you. But at the end of the day, I will have no problem denying that it was still a huge step back from Resident Evil 5 in terms of quality. And with these setbacks, it's not that hard to believe that a boss or two would get caught up in that crap, and in my opinion, the worst boss in Resident Evil 6 was hands down the fight with Derek Simmons. Now, my reason for not liking this boss fight is for similar reasons why I picked the final Wesker boss fight last year, just the reasons are a lot more drastic. Last year, I talked about how jarring the final fight with Wesker was due to how out of place it was when you consider what the series was building him up to. You know, manipulating, cunning, all-around puppet master. Well, they tried to do the same thing with Derek. Throughout Resident Evil 6, they were trying to build him up as this man who had been manipulating humanity for years, but he miscalculates something that leads him to mutating into this, then this, and then Jesus Christ this. But anyway, the difference here is that Wesker had an entire franchise built up his puppet master traits, and as fucked up as Tentacle Wesker was, I could still kinda see why he did what he did. At that point, he just wanted Chris dead by any means necessary. And at least he didn't turn into a fucking dinosaur! And a fucking fly! God, it felt like I was watching a Power Rangers movie when I saw that. Now, given that's just the artistic side of this fight. Wait a minute, did I just say that? And that's a word I just cringe having to use for this, but even if a boss doesn't make sense, it can still be fun, right? Right? Just please say right for this one? And you're not gonna say it, but I don't blame you because Derek is a long and drawn-out battle that overstays his welcome very quickly. Here's a rundown of it. At the end of Chapter 4, you fight him in this bear or rhino-like form, I was never sure, but it goes on for like a good 15 to 20 minutes. Then you fight him again in Chapter 5 in that glorious dinosaur phase, and then you fight him again here. That takes forever because it wants to be more cinematic, and then you finally finish him off here. Oh, but wait, I almost forgot. I was only talking about Leon's playthrough. We still have Ada's campaign where you replay the second and third phase. So in total, you're laying bullets into this guy 6 goddamn times. Christ, man, you don't even fight Yusunak that many times, and his gimmick was being the persistent bastard you fight multiple times. Sure, he appeared more times than Derek did, but at least they weren't all at once and they weren't always bullet sponge fest. All in all, screw these fights. At least Chaos was awesome looking and didn't overstay its welcome, and yet people said Chris was the shittiest campaign? Alright. You remember the song that's associated with Pinocchio. You know, dreams can come true. Unfortunately, you have to be careful with what you wish for, or else Pinocchio's not the only one that's gonna want to be a real boy. Which is apparently what happened with this puppet. Though his name is unknown and his previous owner had stated that it tried to choke him to death. Paranormal investigator Jane Harris had filmed this puppet every night for about 3 months when she captured the startling footage. As seen here, the puppet's moving truss apparently had been able to stand up on its own for a few seconds, only for it to fall and crash into the display case. Is the footage real or a hoax? You decide. But I think we all can agree, that puppet is very creepy looking. I've got a confession, I'm pretty horrible at most fighting games. Even Smash Brothers, I'd probably get my ass handed to me by most competent players. The amount of time that has to be put into fighting games to develop the skill needed to be even decent is a lot, and it's time I just don't have. But I still have a lot of fun with them. You get a couple buddies to play with you and great times will be had, but that's multiplayer. Single player, on the other hand, can be very aggravating at times if it feels like the computer player is programmed to be cheap. And from my experience, nobody felt more cheap than Shao Kahn in Mortal Kombat 9. Got a question for you. Have you ever played against that one little asshole who'll keep using the same move over and over because he knows he'll have a better chance of winning? Sure you have. Usually has you muttering, "You cheap little cocksucker." Well, that's what Shao Kahn does. Throughout arcade mode, you'll fight off against multiple computers, and depending on the difficulty, they can be mind-numbing easy to kicking your ass into your mouth, so instead of shitting your pants due to how devastating they are, you're shitting your throat. But no matter how devastating they might be, they never felt cheap. They just utilized their movesets very well and it felt organic, is that the right word to use here? Shao Kahn, on the other hand, feels very artificial, if that makes sense, as you'll continue using the same move. Over, and over, and over, and over, and oh my god, will you sound fucking different for a change? So it comes back to what I was talking about with that little asshole being cheap. Shao Kahn's that little asshole. Which, okay, fine, what's the big deal? Just come up with a new strategy around it. Well, in my opinion, that breaks the flow of the game. You go from having to develop your skill to take out the competition, to having to go back to square one and play like you're playing for the first time again, using cheap tactics against cheap tactics in an effort to fucking beat them. In my opinion, that's counterproductive. You're spending all this time to get really good at the game, but once you face this prick, well, it's like, well, that goes out the window. Him having more defense and hitting harder would have been more than enough to make him a challenging final boss. But making him the type of player that everyone despises? Not cool, NetherRealm. Not cool. Just one look at Robert, and you can tell he's not your ordinary doll. Especially when you consider the fact that Robert the doll was the inspiration for Chucky from Child's Play. Robert's story starts back in the late 1800s when Thomas Otto and his family moved into a mansion in Key West. The Ottos were known to be pretty strict with their servants, sometimes even mistreating them. One servant that was hired to take care of Thomas's son Robert was fired after Mrs. Otto had caught her practicing black magic, but before she left, she created a doll for their son. Robert would soon become very attached to this doll, taking it wherever he went. The doll would have its very own seat at the dinner table and would even sleep with him. Robert even gave the doll his name and insisted on being called Gene, his middle name, telling his mom that Robert was the doll's name, not his. Gene would be often heard in his toy room having conversations with Robert. Gene would say something in his childish manner and responses could be heard in a much lower voice. Hearing these weird voices, Gene's mother would, on occasion, burst in to find her son cowering in a corner while Robert sat in a chair, glaring at him. But this was only the beginning. Household objects would be found thrown across the room, Gene's toys would turn up mutilated, and giggling could be heard. Whenever these unusual acts took place, Gene always said, "Robert did it." As the mischief grew, the Otto family felt something had to be done, so Robert the doll was placed in a box in the attic where he stayed until Gene inherited the home many years later. Gene was now an artist, and decided to stay in his family home with his wife as he felt the space would be perfect for his art. But old habits die hard when Gene stumbled upon Robert once more. Gene became very attached to Robert like he used to be, taking him everywhere he went. He even had Robert sit in his favorite chair watching Gene and his wife while they slept, much to Mrs. Otto's dismay. While Gene and his wife passed away, for some time, Robert remained in the empty house by himself until a new family purchased the mansion and restored it. The doll, understandably, was once again moved to the attic, but this didn't seem to go over well. The doll was often found throughout the house as if moving on its own, and on one certain night, Robert was found at the foot of the owner's bed, giggling with a kitchen knife in hand. Safe to say, this was more than enough to send them fleeing from the home. Robert was later moved to the East Martell Museum in Key West, where he sits in a display case. Despite his new living arrangements, the doll is believed to have not given up his menacing ways. Some say he'll curse you. If you want to take a picture of him, you must ask politely. He'll tilt his head in permission. However, if he doesn't and you take the picture anyways, a curse will fall upon you. The same will happen if you make fun of him or attempt to taunt and provoke him. Oh, Dynamite Headdy, one of the Sega Genesises? Oh, fuck, I don't know how to say that. It's one of its hidden gems that I can recommend to anyone. It's a colorful platformer with a lot of personality, and its gameplay is fantastic. What more would you want out of a retro video game? And it was also the very first review I ever did for the channel, and looking back at it now, oh my god, how I've improved since I made that one. Not that you couldn't tell, since I can't even say Genesis in plural form correctly. Shut up. But despite how much I cringe every time I watch that video, I'm still proud of it for a couple reasons. One, it started off my channel. That's a milestone in its own right. And two, well, because of that review, I had finally managed to beat Dynamite Headdy. And when I did, it really felt like an accomplishment because it took me since I was a little kid to do so. And what prevented me from beating this game for so long? This motherfucker right here. Twin Freaks. I think I said something in the past, something like, this boss can go eat shit and die? Yeah, saying it again. Eat shit and die. Now, if you actually managed to watch the review fully, I made it perfectly clear. I wasn't a fan of the extreme difficulty spike Headdy had. Once you reach the space shooter stages, the difficulty never really let up until the final world. And I'm sure many were overwhelmed by this. But the climax of this ridiculous difficulty spike was probably the fight with Twin Freaks. And I think the eat shit and die line, well, yeah. My feelings haven't changed much since then. This fight was a hard one for me to decide whether it was truly crappy or not, because on one hand it's a very challenging boss that takes a huge amount of skill to beat, and I certainly won't put down a boss because it's challenging, difficulty curve or not. Yet on the other hand, this fight has this shit. Insta-kills! And nobody likes insta-kills, but if you do, well, play this boss because you'll fucking love it. But this is why this was a tough one for me to decide, because it's very rare to have a boss fight that's very hard but felt like a proper challenge. But it's also very cheap because of this crap. But after thinking about it and looking at the type of game it is, nothing in it should have been this brutal, and the insta-kill aspect pushes it over the edge in my opinion. This is what you have to go through. You have to kill him by hitting him in his only weak spot, which is in the middle of his ear. That spits out projectiles that not only can hurt you, but also block your shots to his ear, as well as the gravity switches that you need to hit to be able to continue moving forward, or else you get squashed. And speaking of the gravity switches, every time you hit one, his face changes back and forth from green to red. And when he's in red mode, you can't even hurt him and he moves faster, the motherfucker, closing into the front, making it a lot harder to avoid walls and squish squish! Add some knockback from these little fuckers and some spikes here and there that are very easy to get stuck into, which leads to, you know, squish squish! I mean, here's the thing. Even when I'm watching someone else play a game, I can still see where they're going and I'm shouting in my mind, no, 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 don't do that, do it this way, you retard. But here, I can't do that because there's just so much going on that it's impossible to say that I could do it better. But that's because there isn't a better way. Get good, don't fuck up, and pray that knockback doesn't end up killing you. That's the only advice I can give for this fight. And that is probably why this is on the #1 pick. And there you have it, another year, another 5 crappy bosses. I just want to say thank you guys for watching, and I'm sorry about the delay. This moving thing has been a lot more time consuming than I thought it was going to be, and I'm going to try my best to get the Halloween video done by the 31st, but I really appreciate your understanding if I can. Well, have a good night, and I'll see you in the next one. Hopefully it isn't until after the 31st.